Madame la professeure, Madame la doyenne, chers et chers collègues, Mesdames et Messieurs, chères étudiantes, chers étudiants, chers publics. Au nom du laboratoire RIFT, Recherche, Intervention, Formation et Travail de l'Université de Genève, j'ai le très grand plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue pour cette grande conférence et d'accueillir ce soir la professeure Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak à l'occasion de sa première visite à Genève. Je suis très reconnaissant à la professeure Spivak d'avoir accepté notre invitation et de délivrer ce soir la conférence que nous nous réjouissons d'écouter. La présence parmi nous de Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak est un très grand honneur et un privilège pour réfléchir au rôle de l'éducation dans la fabrication de nos rapports sociaux, une opportunité aussi pour questionner la place de l'éducation à l'âge adulte et comme levier d'émancipation et d'expression du pouvoir d'agir. Ce sont là les ambitions fortes du laboratoire RIFT que nous sommes très heureux de pouvoir partager avec notre conférencière ce jour. Plus largement, l'événement qui prend place aujourd'hui est aussi pour l'Université de Genève une occasion de franchir les frontières disciplinaires et de faire dialoguer des champs qui, dans d'autres contextes, pourraient rester étanches et cloisonnés. Mais la voix de Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak porte au-delà des frontières géographiques, culturelles et disciplinaires. Elle est profondément rassembleuse et nous en avons la preuve par votre présence nombreuse aujourd'hui. La conférence de ce soir est organisée à l'initiative du laboratoire RIFT de la Faculté de Psychologie et des Sciences de l'Éducation, mais elle est le fruit d'un partenariat particulièrement fertile, non seulement avec d'autres structures et entités de l'Université de Genève, mais aussi avec d'autres institutions et hautes écoles de Suisse romande. Nous remercions la Faculté des Lettres, l'Institut des études genre et le service égalité et diversité de l'Université de Genève pour leur participation, et nous saluons aussi tout particulièrement la participation des entités suivantes, partenaires de cette conférence. Le Gender Center du Geneva Graduate Institute, la Haute École d'Art et de Design de Genève, la Haute École de Travail Social de Genève, la Haute École de Travail Social et de la Santé de Lausanne, et le NORAG, le réseau sur les politiques et la coopération internationale en éducation et en formation. Cet événement exceptionnel a été rendu possible grâce au généreux soutien de la Société académique de Genève et du Fonds général de l'Université de Genève. Nous leur adressons nos plus vifs remerciements pour leur généreuse contribution. Et donc, sans m'attarder plus longuement, je vous souhaite, Mesdames, Messieurs, une agréable et stimulante conférence, et j'ai le plaisir de céder la parole à Cecilia Mornata et Maryvonne Charmillot pour un mot d'introduction. Merci à vous.
Bonsoir à chacune et chacun. Merci beaucoup d'être avec nous ce soir. Donc avec Cecilia, nous sommes très heureuses de vous voir aussi nombreux et nombreuses à la conférence de Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak. Alors cette conférence s'inscrit dans le cycle de conférences Prendre soin dans le monde, perspective du care et formation d'adultes que nous avons organisé au sein du laboratoire RIFT, comme l'a rappelé Laurent Fillietaz. Par ce cycle, et plus particulièrement par la conférence de ce soir, nous souhaitons questionner nos pratiques éducatives et de formation et questionner aussi les références théoriques et épistémologiques qui les sous-tendent. Nous souhaitons, autrement dit, faire un pas de côté, penser au sens fort du terme, faire en quelque sorte notre autocritique. Nous avons, pour soutenir notre démarche, invité des chercheuses pour nous accompagner dans nos analyses, et la présence de Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak aujourd'hui est dans ce cadre un très grand privilège. Nous vous remercions très chaleureusement, chère Gayatri, d'être avec nous ce soir et de partager avec un large public les connaissances que vous avez construites tout au long de votre incroyable parcours. Ce qui nous a animés dans l'élaboration de ce cycle de conférences, c'est de mieux comprendre comment, en tant que chercheuses et chercheurs, formatrices, formateurs, intervenantes, intervenants, nos modes d'être au monde portent encore si souvent à assigner les personnes et les vivants à leur état de vulnérabilité, au risque de laisser entendre qu'ils et elles seraient responsables de cette vulnérabilité, alors que celle-ci est constitutive de tout être vivant, mais aussi qu'elle est une construction sociale. Une construction sociale qui vise, comme l'analyse Hélène Thomas, à confisquer aux pauvres leur citoyenneté politique. Hélène Thomas écrit « Les vulnérables sont construits et esthétisés comme victimes. Ils sont annulés, dépouillés du statut de personne, autrement dit, dépouillés de leur droit à avoir un nom et un domicile entre les murs desquels ils pourraient abriter leur intimité. Faute de moyens de ne pas tomber les uns sur les autres, ils sont à la fois atomisés et agglutinés en une masse. Il leur est enjoint de disparaître de la scène publique et de ne pas réclamer leurs droits. Ce que nous souhaitons, c'est donc de mieux comprendre comment nos modes d'être au monde nous amènent encore trop souvent à porter un regard surplombant sur les expériences des personnes, au risque de renforcer des asymétries que nous dénonçons par ailleurs. Autrement dit, mieux comprendre comment nos modes d'être au monde nous amènent à croire naïvement que la formation, l'éducation auraient le pouvoir de sortir les personnes des situations de vulnérabilité auxquelles elles sont assignées, ou le pouvoir de rendre aux personnes un pouvoir d'agir, sans les considérer pleinement, laissant entendre que nous, formateurs, formatrices, chercheurs, chercheuses, éducateurs, éducatrices, aurions une sorte de super-pouvoir, au sens de pouvoir supérieur, permettant de savoir ce qui est bon ou pas de faire pour les autres, quand bien même nous parlons d'accompagnement, autrement dit, d'être avec les personnes et de ne pas penser à leur place.
Dans cette volonté de re-questionner inlassablement nos ancrages, nos conceptions du monde et du pouvoir que nous exerçons par nos pratiques, la perspective du Caire nous a paru féconde pour nous guider, car cette perspective permet à nos yeux d'assumer la responsabilité éthique et politique qui nous incombe dans nos façons de percevoir l'autre, surtout ceux et celles qui sont réduits au silence. La responsabilité éthique et politique de reconnaître et entendre leur voix pour trouver ensemble un moyen de rendre l'environnement source d'émancipation et de vitalité. Cette responsabilité est primordiale, car comme Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak l'a rappelé à maintes reprises, les subalternes, autrement dit les personnes à la marge de la société, ne sont pas sans voix. Leur voix n'est pas entendue, n'est pas écoutée, ce qui n'est pas du tout pareil. Non seulement elles parlent, elles hurlent même. Par leurs actes, elles cherchent à nous rappeler leur présence et comment le monde dans lequel nous sommes barricadés les exclut et les assigne à des positions désagentifiées. Notre monde n'écoute pas les damnés de la terre, ou seulement quand leurs plaintes éveillent la pitié. Alors notre monde les héroïse, les allégorise, comme l'écrit Hélène Thomas. Mais lorsque la plainte se fait courroux, fureur révolutionnaire ou exigence démocratique, notre monde les fait taire. Quel est dès lors le rôle de l'éducation? Comment pouvons-nous, en tant qu'acteurs et actrices du champ éducatif au sens large, contribuer à lever les oppressions, contribuer sans produire ni renforcer les asymétries épistémiques, de genre et de classe, contribuer sans renforcer les codes d'une éducation colonialiste, mais en mettant en œuvre un questionnement critique permanent. Nous sommes persuadés que les travaux de Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak peuvent permettre d'esquisser quelques réponses à cette question, et pour ceci, nous la remercions encore chaleureusement pour sa présence. Nous passons maintenant la parole à Madame Daniska Tampise Klebo.
Thank you for joining us today. I am pleased to introduce our speaker, Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, a renowned scholar in literature theory, postcolonial feminist critique, and subaltern studies. First, let's explore her background. Born in India, Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak has a remarkable academic background, having studied at the University of Calcutta and Cornell University, among other prestigious institutions. Her prominence in literary theory, postcolonial feminist critique, and subaltern studies is well recognized. Now, let's consider her key works. Her seminal work, Can the Subaltern Speak?, questions the ability of marginalized individuals, the subalterns, to be heard in a context dominated by Western discourses. She challenges these groups' simplified representations, highlighting the complexity of their situation. Her influence extends to the field of postcolonialism. Spivak has addressed postcolonialism by analyzing the enduring cultural and political influence of former colonial powers. She criticizes neocolonialism and highlights persistent inequalities and biases in contemporary discourses. Also, significant is her feminist approach. Integrating feminism into her post-colonial reflections, Spivak offers a perspective on women's struggles, especially in non-Western contexts. She questions Western norms of feminism, advocating for a more nuanced understanding of gender issues across different cultures. Let's also consider her academic career. As a university professor at Columbia University and a founding member of the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society, Spivak has authored numerous influential works and has taught at several prestigious institutions. Her influence extends beyond literary theory, impacting cultural studies, philosophy, and politics, where she continues to stimulate critical thinking. Finally, let's summarize her enduring impact. To summarize, Spivak's work retains significant importance in contemporary studies. Her ability to interrogate power structures and advocate for marginalized voices has left a mark in many academic fields and beyond. With these insights, I am pleased to hand the stage to Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you. It's an honor. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. And you may regret having given me so much applause, but hey, You know, it's like paying someone before she's actually done her stuff. But I'll try my best. This is not my first time in Geneva. It's my second time. I'm very slow. I'm going to be 82 in February, so you'll have to. But as I say to people often, I too was young once. Well, mettre la philosophie en œuvre. You know, the Collège International de Philosophie, which, is there a bigger clock? I mean, this thing, I can't, does someone have a bigger watch? Because this, because I can't tell how long. Okay. I don't know, it's a white face is better. They all have black faces. Yes, I know. Okay. This one. Taken out of context, these remarks are not useful. But, you know, that's why context is very, very important. Anyway, so the Collège International de Philosophie, which many of us, under the guidance of Jacques Derrida and Jean-François Lyotard, founded 40 years ago. I mean, we were not major players, they were the ones, but we were involved. And so it's having a 40th anniversary celebration on the 7th of December, in 5 days. Many people are saying that it's gotten too institutionalized. That is the problem that many of us who have been validated and supported by institutions for a very long time. I've been teaching full-time at the university now for 58 years. I became an assistant professor at the University of Iowa in the fall of 1965. That's a very long time ago. So those of us who are supported and validated by institutions know that institutionalization is sometimes a burden. But on the other hand, we have to think of the fact that we also work within institutions. They are a necessity for us. So therefore, it actually gives us a responsibility of ceaseless constructive resistance while we are supported by the institute. Constructive, while we are supported by the institution. So to say that the collège has become institutionalized is to state the obvious, as if one is not institutionalized oneself. So I will certainly go and talk about these things. It's not, you're never free of the institution. So, but they are having a conference which is called Faire de la philosophie. And the de is, you know, very classically in parentheses. And the question that has to be asked, and I have 45 minutes, I'm certainly just going to throw it at you, you think about it. We can talk about it in the Q&A. What is the difference between faire la philosophie and mettre la philosophie en œuvre? There's a difference between the two things. And so I'm not going to talk about any of these things because you can't in 45 minutes. But I'm going to tell you, and maybe we can discuss it, that la philosophie is not an abstraction that falls from the sky. It is a certain way of doing the philosophy which one actually sets to work. One can think of fascism as a philosophy. How is that set to work? It has been set to work in my country now. I'm Indian. So how does one, it is almost ready to be set to work in my place of residence in the United States. So how is it set to work? How is which philosophy set to work? Philosophy by itself is not a good, solid abstraction. Obstruction was a good Freudian error instead of abstraction. That's what I said. And what is it? Practice of freedom. I used the word freedom, and we can talk about that as well in the Q&A. But let me say, before I actually begin, that I am a teacher, paid teacher, which is a different thing. I am a paid teacher of the humanities. And not only of the humanities, but of the literary humanities. I have been trained by very solid teachers. I've had extraordinary teachers. I have been trained by them to learn how to learn from the singular and the unverifiable. Fiction is not a lie. It's neither rational nor irrational. The imagination is not an excess. So therefore, that particular trick is the one that is practice of freedom. Because as the world goes on, you would be surprised to know how many things are unverifiable. Statistics stop at a certain time. The contingent is unverifiable. And all of the terrors of artificial intelligence nonetheless tell us that AI can never catch the contingent. It can certainly pretend to do so, but that is not enough. So to an extent, that practice of freedom, for me, a teacher of the humanities, comes through that skill which is never complete, because the unverifiable can never be fully verified. The task is not to verify it. So what is it? And having said this, I will begin my few minutes of talk. Most disciplines are engaged in the production of knowledge. If you make a truth claim, you are producing knowledge, and your responsibility is actually lodged there. But the humanities, the literary humanities, are different. They teach the practice of learning. That's the freedom. It is no use only producing knowledge, as we know in the world today, unless you also do this other thing, the practice of learning. Again, I don't have the time to talk about what I mean by that, but I've written a great deal on it, and certainly we can also discuss it. But let's consider this, the few words that I've uttered, as a kind of preamble. I'm coming from there. I'm not saying everything. For me, the word education is not anything much. It's an abstraction in the English language, in the European languages. It's not even an Indo-European cognate. And if one thinks about the world's wealth of languages, then to hang on to that word for me is not a lot. At least Philosophy means something to me, philosophia, okay. But the idea of the practice of learning and the production of knowledge, this cluster of ideas one can carry with one, certainly into Africa. And I will talk a little bit about that if there's time, right at the end of my talk. And generally into other areas. This contrast, the contrast between, let's say, the rational and the reasonable, this contrast exists in a very great part of the world. And that's my preamble. That's where I begin. Of course, at the beginning, I offer my thanks to these two fantastic colleagues, Maryvonne Charmillot and Cecilia Mornata. I mean, I really feel, I mean, we haven't known each other for very long, but I really feel as if I'm extremely impressed with their work, and I feel that we are allies. So I will offer criticism because they want me to give a response to their work. They have questions. And simply to offer the praise that I feel they deserve is meaningless if you're serious, if you're really allies. So I want to thank them a great deal for having invited me here and for having given me this responsibility of being, as it were, a senior sister who actually offers not just praise, which they deserve, but also some constructive criticism with which I hope they will move. And the second thing is that I will speak in the name of peace. I do not want to go into a political discourse, but I just want to mark the spot by saying, call me Palestinian. Thank you. At least I know where I am. You know, one is never sure. I was just asked the huge conference on democracy, and I was supposed to be keynoting for a year and a half. We were planning. University of Dresden. Suddenly, the rectorate asks me to come talk to them so that they know my politics on Palestine-Israel before I can actually address an audience. Well, of course, I canceled immediately. But if we have come to this, if academic freedom is going to be constrained by politics of a very specific sort, I think the world is really in a poor place. It's a broken world. So I'm very happy that I know where I am. Anyway, so let me just say that I really am very impressed by what Maryvonne and Cecilia are doing with these diverse groups when they find out and when they really try very carefully to find out what would ameliorate the situation within which they are. This is very unusual, that it's not just something that they have chosen to do. I mean, one kind of adult education. For example, concentrate, as many people do, on migrants. It's a wonderful concentration. But it makes a decision beforehand. And Europe, there's a great deal of that going on in Europe. But it makes the decision beforehand that this is what we are going to do. Or they take a certain kind of race group. You know, that's also a very fine thing to do. In Europe, I identify very much with the Romani movement, for example, especially when I think about the connection with India. Also, there are identity groups that are supported sometimes, but not these two women, and you correct me, Cecilia and Maryvonne, if I'm misrepresenting you in the Q&A, say, look, you made a mistake. But what really impresses me is that these two women, as far as I can understand, actually are taking their task from the diversity of the group with which they are relating. That to me is the first thing that I really like. And then what I also understand, I mean, I haven't really worked with them, this is an outsider's understanding, but this is what gives me the feeling of alliance. What I understand is that they also check again and again and again to see how, in fact, the amelioration of the situation of each of the diverse groups with their characteristics is taking place because of the way they are learning how this particular group's situation can be ameliorated. And what I also like very, very much is that it is, see, I believe, when people sometimes ask me, why do you do what you do? Because I do a little bit of educational activism, inclusive education. They ask me, why do you do what you do? And I say again, if you have to ask me why, then you don't understand anything. Most people who do this kind of strange stuff are obsessive about it. Frankly, I do it because I cannot not do it. That's why. So it's not a question, it's a very love-hate kind of situation. So, and I had a feeling that these two women also work in this way, which should not be just called the polite terms, commitment, engagement, and so on. Obsession, that's more serious. It's got me. I'm not the one who's actually doing it. This I felt, and again, I may be wrong. So there is that. And what I also like very much is that RIFT, research, and innovation, and then intervention, and then formation, which really can't be translated formation, so I'll keep it. It's a little bit like Bildung, you can't translate that word. So at any rate, and formation and travail, they've got, in fact, matching qualities in the people with whom they work, beginning with vulnerability. And so, therefore, the interaction, therefore, the idea goes, they have this double obligation. Eh? And I like the idea of RIFT for another reason. And I hope you will forgive me for going there, because I am a literary person. Within RIFT, they're also very self-critical. They don't just want to ameliorate the situation of the diversified groups with whom they work. Through that, they also want to criticize their own activities within the institution and ask again and again, how can they rethink their work, their operation, learning from what they've been doing. So all of this is wonderful. But for me, as I say, as a literary person, RIFT also brings to mind, of course, the way the Mesozoic began, the way there was the tectonic shift. That's called the rift, right? And Africa and Asia separated. This is very big in Africa. There is actually a rift there, which is something that people talk about a great deal. And it was metaphorically very important in Black America. Harper's Ferry, where John Brown actually instituted what was the first war of independence against enslavement was perceived as, christened as, the rift between the Potomac and the Shenandoah. It's been described again and again. So for me, the image of the rift is a very strong one. And I should also say, and I've recently written about this, that this rift created something which is called, or rather took away something which is called Gondwana land, right? And in India, there is a group, a tribal group called the Gors, whose place is also called Gondwana, and there are connections of this sort, almost mythical connections. And the author that I have translated, Mahasweta Devi, a revolutionary Bengali writer of fiction, she, perhaps her most revolutionary writing, which really predates the general consciousness about climate change, written in the 70s, a work called Pterodactyl. This is, in fact, located in Gondwana land, and a pterodactyl comes in to visit, to distinguish between the planetary climate change and our own work to destroy the resources of the world. This, the Anthropocene. So to an extent, for me, rift also brings in all of these connotations. And therefore, I will start, or rather, well, I've only spoken for 20 minutes. I have 25 more minutes. I'm really going to try to stop I may not be able to do everything. So I will start then to speak after the idea of peace. I will start to speak in terms of solidarity with the undertaking that has been called rift. Now, this will be my first moment of criticism. The idea of institutional solidarity. You already heard, I believe, that I would learn more, and the criticism that I'm making perhaps has already been undertaken in the detail that Cecilia and Maryvonne actually have engaged in their work. But if so, they'll say so, and we'll just agree, and this will not be critical at all. But I have already said that we should think of the institution as a necessity to be ceaselessly also constructively resisted. And here I will give 3 formulas which have helped us to deal with it this way. One of them, and I've already mentioned this 2 days ago, is Raymond Williams. Raymond Williams, in one essay called Marxism and Literature. I was thinking of Voloshinov's book, which is called something. I think Raymond Williams's essay is called Marxism and Literature. I'm not 100% sure. This is what happens when you grow old. But my doctor says that as long as you know you're forgetting, you're okay. So at least, I do know. And someone here can perhaps tell me that what Raymond Williams's essay's title is. And if you can't, then it's okay that I didn't remember. You'll have to find out yourself. So in this essay, Raymond Williams takes up what Herbert Marcuse and Robert Paul Williams called repressive tolerance. That's how institutions work. Repressive tolerance, okay? So Raymond Williams suggests that the dominant in a social formation is always turning opposition into alternatives. There are rogue states, failing states that don't do this, that just cut you down We know that this happens. But the smart states practice repressive tolerance. They constantly turn opposition into alternatives, and people generally buy into it, and everything is okay. So this is something that we have remembered. I'm a child of the 60s, not quite a child of the 60s. I was grown up in the 60s. I'm actually a child of the 50s. I was born in 42, so by the 50s I'm really thinking, doing. But at any rate, the 60s influenced me. And this idea that the dominant is always turning opposition into alternatives, we experienced this a great deal. And then what Williams describes every cultural moment as a kind of dance rather than just standing by itself. And all of it involves what institutions try to foreclose. And one of them is the play between the archaic and the residual. The archaic being something that is called tradition, but it's not useful anymore. But there are things that are brought into the fore and called the residual. And we see this happening very much in globality, that the longue durée things that supposedly the colonial formations had stopped coming back again. In my country, theocracy. In the United States, a version of repressive Puritanism. In China, the Silk Road. You are going to see this, I mean, the Osmanli stuff that we see in the remnants of the Ottoman Empire now. If you go, we have a group of us have a little think tank called Rethinking Globality, and we look not at the traditional story of globalization, but rather the way in which different countries are, in fact, different continents are, in fact, reclaiming the residual part of Raymond Williams's discussion. And then comes the emergent, which is something that is not necessarily oppositional, but it's coming up, emergent. And what is more, and this gets into the moment, the cultural moment that's dancing with all of these things. And then, as I said a couple of days ago, reminded ourselves, there is something called the pre-emergent. And I then said that people who have been trained well into respecting the contingent and the unverifiable can get into looking at the pre-emergent, which relates to the Marxian notion of ideology. So to an extent, when we think about institutions, I think this is what we have to somehow ignore a little, this dance, because we take the dominant, taking opposition into alternative already as a kind of model for solidarity, because we are alternative. So therefore, this is something that I would remind us of. And then I would also talk about, Derrida certainly influenced me, and Derrida at a certain point in a very wonderful essay called The University in the Eyes of Its Pupils, he writes that these kinds of responsibilities that, Maryvonne and, I always think of you as Claire. I don't know why. So my two young sisters, that they think about these kinds of responsibilities. Derrida writes, these new responsibilities cannot be purely academic. Sometimes they really have to be practiced outside of the academy. And certainly that has been my life. My activist life is not within the academy, it's outside, although I'm very respectful of the academy rather than simply take it as a negative word. And in fact, Derrida goes on to write in this essay, even when it claims to be revolutionary, the responsibilities within, practiced within the academy, this discourse does not always trouble the most conservative forces of the university. This relates because, because the quality is good, because certain reasonable principles are obeyed. This relates to what Raymond Williams was talking about. And finally, of course, I also have to talk a little bit about the new international. And again, I'm not going to explain myself because I have to stop now in 15 minutes. The new international it was thought through because the old international, the Internationale, we used to, I'm sorry, we used to sing it in English, but you remember that line. I know you don't because you're too young. But we used to sing, the Internationale will save the human race, but it didn't. The formation of it not only did not save the human race, it went in directions that I don't think, and even if you take the best part of what the Internationale did do, which is the union movement, basically, the union movement is not really something that you just want to praise today anymore. So, its connections with management, its treatment of women, the fact that you can become a union member by paying dues and so on, this is not really something that, the world's workers uniting to lose their chains. I'm not going to be able to, I'm a thoroughly left-wing person, but on the other hand, I'm not in a party, never have been. And the thing is that this particular idea that the Internationale will save the human race is gone. So therefore, totally gone. So therefore, the idea of the new international is a very solid idea. This idea is where, in fact, both of you would have a sense. Cecilia, I must. See, this is also a senior moment. Cecilia and Maryvonne will, I think, agree with me on, that is one of the big double binds, individual and collective. So the idea of the new international is that the students of one person, like Karl Marx, are far flung in the world and work, in fact, with collectives and being members of collectives in a certain loosely strung way, which, in fact, is much more effective as an international than the old notion of internationals connected to so-called socialist state formations could ever bring forth. So therefore, the work that we have done through internalizing the idea of repressive tolerance, through thinking that it may be necessary to go out into the outside of the academy in order to be activists. And here I will speak of a woman who's very strongly of this opinion, so that she's also very much an ally. And again, I hope in this crowd people know her work. I'm not sure, but if you don't, you should. And that's Maryse Condé. Maryse Condé, the Guadeloupean writer, who's a fantastic writer. She also, like many of us, is very much on the left, but believes that you have to go outside of the academy sometimes in order to be successfully activist. So because of this, we do have a critique of I do have a critique of institutional solidarity. It's not a bad idea, but it's not necessarily a good idea either. So as I'm coming to an end, I think what I will do is talk about where I feel it really is not perhaps enough. You folks, the two of you, are interested in the idea of care. And in the idea of care, you take Toronto and you quote her, and also Gilligan to an extent. Now these feminists are, not just to my mind, but to many of our minds. I mean, I think Gilligan and Toronto are fantastic workers. Again, I'm speaking from within the same struggle. But Toronto's notion of care is too easy. You know, you become a caregiver and you become a caretaker, and the care goes both sides. It doesn't happen like that. It's a much harder thing. And again, I'm not going to, and it doesn't, care is a fragile concept. It's not something that actually, it's not something that actually supports. It has to be supported. So, and care has been trivialized today in the international civil society formation. I've been looking at your television, and I could say a lot about care within the Swiss context, at least the Swiss-French context, which is what I was more or less looking at. I mean, most of the stuff was in French. So I think that's where my biggest question comes in. Now, I want to tell you 3 stories which may make it impossible for me to show my PPT. That's fine. Let me tell you 3 stories. The PPT I might be able to show bits of during the Q&A. The first story is how I began. You know, for 40 years, I have had schools in the poorest areas of West Bengal, and I have been training teachers and from the community, and training students, infants, not adult education. My adult education is at Columbia. And in fact, Melina, you know what we can do? We can put up the very first slide so that you can see my adult class, and my children in my elementary class, okay? And this elementary class picture, this is actually just last week, okay? This one is, the adult class is in 2014. But so there's a break between the two. So, but now let me just tell you stories. This children's schools, I didn't really I had no intention of doing anything like that. I was looking to become useful because 21 years of really miasmatic 3 marriages, the most horrible sort, came to an end, okay? And so I suddenly, you know, after all of the anguish and so on, I suddenly emerged, and I thought, I found what I really wanted to do, which was be useful to others. And so I was looking around. But, you know, I certainly wasn't going toward inclusive education. I mean, that story also, I can't tell you what it was I was doing. But at any rate, I was asked by a middle-class activist to establish schools because my behavior when I went to give money to these extremely remote villages was teacherly, even as I was mingling with these so-called subalterns. Subaltern, mostly I use Gramsci's short definition, that is to say, social groups that are in the margins of history. Social groups in the margins of history. That's Gramsci's short definition. So when he saw how it was that I behaved, he wrote me, this was in West Bengal, he wrote me saying, establish a school. And he gave me a little budget thing. I didn't do anything. And then I went for a conference on radical philosophy in London. And when Peter Osborne, I think I should have told you this story on a day before yesterday, perhaps. If so, then I'm repeating it for a larger audience. And another point, the point I want to make. So Peter Osborne came to get me, and for some reason, I had taken the paperwork for this undertaking with me. And I said to Peter, drive by a post office, will you? And so I actually wrote a $1 check. In those days, this was much easier to send foreign money to India. I wrote a $1 check, and I made a little description of the school, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on, mailed it out. And then I called my mother, and I said to my Ma, I've done a terrible thing. I'm never going to get out of this damn thing, I know. It's not like a marriage. You can't break it up. It's going to catch me until the end of my life when I can't do anything, but I'm still doing this. And I am. This is my second job, right? Columbia is one, and this one. It's not a project. It's a job. 40 years, I go to India 6 to 9 times a year. Never miss a class at Columbia. Can you imagine how it is now? And I'm still doing this. So it's something that catches you. My mother was married at 14. My brother was born when she was 15. So my mother says to me, dear, this is modern life in Bengali, of course. Anybody understands Bengali here? Yeah, okay, how many? How many? 14 জন? Very good. Okay, then let me just say it in Bengali, and then I will come back into it. বলছে, বাবারে এই তো হচ্ছে আধুনিক জীবন। মেয়ে বলে মাকে যে এটা বিয়ের মতো না, এটা ভাঙা যাবে না। এটা কি কথা হলো রে? This is what my mother said. This is modern life, that a daughter says to her mother, it's not like a marriage. It can't be broken down. So anyway, that was but the point was that I was saying to my mother that this care stuff catches the whole of you. It's not something that you do only within a grant kind of situation. This happens to everyone, not just your diversified groups. That's the first story. The second story is, yes, Brent Edwards, okay? Anyone know his name here? This is very sad. You should know his name. He's a man who's done fantastic work on the African diaspora, and really good work. An African-American colleague of mine. He's a professor at Columbia, but he also was my student. Okay, so he took every course I ever taught. And the first course that I taught at Columbia in 1991 was on feminism and decolonization. And he took that course. And he came to talk to me after class. And I am, first of all, very intellectually insecure. I can't explain that right now either, because I only have 5 minutes. But I do ask students to tell me about class, because I often, obviously not always, I mean, someone at Wesleyan said to me, what you're talking about is horse shit. I couldn't get any critique, any constructive stuff from him. So the hostility, etc. I could tell you so many stories, but no. Brent came, and I said to Brent, asked Brent, how was it? How was it? He said, well, of course it was fantastic, but you were very intimidating. So I said, what are you talking about? I sang, I made jokes. So he says, well, that just looked like the idiosyncrasy of a brilliant person. I said, so what can I do? I mean, I'm singing and making jokes. I can't do anything else. So he says, well, you know, the real problem is we have other good teachers. That's not a problem. But the thing is, when we meet them on the street, they are another kind of person. Your problem is that you're the same person in the classroom and on the street. So I asked him, so should I kill myself? So he gives a little smile. Unfortunately, I told this story at another huge conversation thing that I had, and Seagull published it, and I forgot that I told this story, and so it's now in print. And Brent was incredibly angry. He says, you print the story saying, I told you to kill yourself. I said, well, Brent, I'm very sorry. I think it's a wonderful story because that, again, shows that when you get into this kind of stuff, it affects your whole life. You don't just do it for one set of people. And then the third, so there are Bengali understanders here. So the third, I will say, is I just wrote. Now, you have heard of Ranajit Guha, right? Okay, a few voices at least. He was the editor of the Subaltern Studies Collective, but he was an extremely sort of arrogant man and didn't like feisty women, okay? But on the other hand, you know, I was just asked to write a long obituary in Bengali for him, and he died recently at the age of 100, it was a very good Bengali journal that asked me, Onushtub, and the editor said, look, say everything that you feel, because it was known that I was critical of him. So I wrote a long critical essay, but I also acknowledged what I had received from him. And this is how I closed the essay, okay? And I'm just going to read it in Bengali, since there are people who understand it, and then I'll translate it. I wrote, Ranajit da মাথায় ঢুকিয়ে দিয়েছিলেন কোনো ভাবনা চিন্তায় যেন নিম্নবর্গ বৈচিত্র্য প্রসূত মনোভাব কল্পনা করতে না ভুলি আমার জীবন বদলে গেল 40 বছর আগে সংক্রামক এই ঝোঁকের প্রভাবে So you see, it's the same idea. What I wrote was Ranajit, brother Ranajit, which is a way of speaking in, you know, it's like adding son. Ranajit da, it made it, thrust it into my head that I should not forget to imagine the mindset which comes from the diversity, boichitra, beautiful word, originates in the diversity of the subaltern classes. That I should not ever forget to think about that when I was thinking about anything. He had thrust it into my head. And therefore, my entire life changed 40 years ago. This is how I paid my final tribute after a very critical obituary essay. And then at the end I say, my entire life changed 40 years ago by the influence of this infectious tendency. It's more than tendency, jhonk is also an obsession. So to an extent, that's what Ranjita gave me, and I didn't stick with subaltern studies. I went on to work for the subaltern, Gramsci's notion of producing the subaltern intellectual, and I changed that somewhat, producing problem solvers rather than solving problems among the largest sector of the electorate used as numbers voting, that is voting democracy reduced to arithmetic. So to an extent, that's the basis of my critique of just taking care as something that enables and something a la Toronto that kind of happens. It's really something that affects you fully, and I would say, I was going to use an example, which is what my PowerPoint is about, and I've actually taken 50 minutes, but I'm going to take 1 minute just because, and I'm not going to read what I had written about it, but because my student audience 2 days ago very much liked it, I'm going to end with a video, 1 minute, 1+ minutes, which, Melina, you're going to be able to play it? The video? Okay. Where, you know, I've been working with these people for a very long time, but they have, these two, but they are just talking here about it. Okay, come on, sound.
Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, the Center for Digital
Go back. This is Oluwaseun Akinfenwa, and that one is Hassanat Bello.
Under the supervision of the program facilitator, Professor Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, the Center for Digital Archive and African Mother Tongue Languages was created here at KWASU some 10 years ago. The center was established to midwife the realization of some objectives and anticipated goals. The why and how of language survival and extinction are among the terms of reference. More importantly, how unsystematized languages have survived extinction, despite the threat of language mainstreaming. It involves in-field relations with native speakers of unsystematized languages so as to be taught by the native speakers. Doing this, we have visited Malete community, Safari community, Elemere community, Shao, Odunduroko, Agoja, Gomon, and Elemere community here in Kwara State. Part of the activities include university-wide symposiums, which are routinely organized for the purpose of institutional visibility and enlightenment. The Mother Tongue team organizes annual university-wide meetings on selected themes. Discussants are selected from both within and outside the KWASU community. The intervention, spearheaded by Professor Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, has been of tremendous benefit to the university and its contiguous community. Rather than being hampered by the flaws of the past, in which learning and knowing were top-down affairs, excluding intellectuals from learning from below, the program advocates a departure from the past through pushing for a subject agency shift and the reconstitution of the epistemological foundation of knowledge. With the advantages offered by the program, we are approaching the curve where we'll understand where the rescue will come from. That's rescue from a whole lot of global issues. We enjoy being a part of this program, and we are determined to be aggressive in its pursuits and to continue to engage robustly with the terms of reference.
Congratulations, Prof.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
So this is in Kwara State University in Nigeria, small university, rural university, 10 years old. So I'm not going to say anything about it. I just wanted to give you this video as a closing gift, since part of my speech I'm just keeping for the Q&A. So I have, unfortunately, taken 6 minutes more than 45 minutes. Forgive me, and thank you for your patience.
I would like to encourage you to ask some questions. You can speak either in French or in English. And if you do so, keep it brief, please. And if you do speak in French, speak slowly for the speaker's understanding. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'd rather hear your French, but, you know, I'm, like I said, intellectually insecure, so.
So, if you have some questions. Where?
This is Bengali, is this English or French?
Yeah, it's English.
Okay. Speak up, speak up.
Yes.
And you know, I can't, there's so much light, I can't see you. Where are you?
I'm just right in front, but way in the back.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, maybe you just cannot see me at all.
No, I can't see you at all. All I see is darkness and huge lights. So
Okay.
tell me, I can't see anyone. Tell me who you are, tell me your name.
I'm Anukriti, and I'm from India. I'm a postdoc here. I live here for the last 2 years. And my question is about Kashmir and the idea of institutionalism. I want to ask what happens about ceaseless, constructive, I don't know, the words that you used.
Resistance. Yes.
When you don't believe in the institution itself that you are resisting. You don't consider yourself a part of the institution. For example, the Kashmiri people do not, in large quantities, in large populations, do not consider themselves a part of the Indian state. How do you resist in such a situation?
Well, you know, there I don't think they have to resist or do anything, because I was talking about people who are supported by certain institutions by choice. So you're right. I don't think you can, I mean, I am certainly not interested in doing anything for, let's say, Hindutva. You know, I'm not part of that. I wouldn't dream of, you know, I'm talking about Hinduism used, politicized fundamentalism used as, you know, I mean, I was born a caste Hindu, I'm an atheist. I'm very interested in working with subaltern groups, but that is not something I want to touch. So it doesn't give me my validation. On the other hand, you know, if you are seeking validation from within an institution, if I may, I will repeat a story I've already told this morning because it makes it clearer. See, Barbara Harlow, who was a very fantastic activist, intellectual, I knew her when she was a graduate. I knew her all through her life from when she was a graduate student. And she was a teaching assistant at Yale, and she really resented having to teach Jane Austen. And so I sat her down and I said, Barbara, you despise the university, don't you? And she says, yeah. And I said, but you want permanence within it, don't you? She says, yeah. Well, I said, think of marriage in Jane Austen that way. You know, permanence within an institution that gives you security and you despise it. See, that is the model I was thinking about. There you have to, if you are getting validation from it, then you can't just say it's awful, it's bad faith. So there I think your job is ceaseless constructive resistance. But your point is correct. You know, if you don't consider yourself part of something, you're not obliged to do anything about it at all, unless, you know, it mows you down. So thank you for your question.
Thank you for your answer. So does someone have something to say or to ask? In French or in English? Yes, please. There's someone over there.
Hi, good evening.
Okay, tell me your name and tell me what you do.
I'm Lucie Mercier, and I'm a researcher in philosophy, and I happen to be Peter Osborne's PhD student, so I was...
You happen to be what?
Peter Osborne's PhD student.
Oh, no kidding.
So I've met you once already.
Did you?
But I was just wondering about if you could come back to the very beginning of your talk and this notion of mettre la philosophie en œuvre. I was curious, interested in the way you talked about philosophy as a bad abstraction, and could you tell us more about what does that mean, mettre la philosophie en œuvre? Is this to do with, I mean, would you frame that conceptually as practice or a sort of intention? Or how would you explain that further?
Intention.
Intention.
It's compromised right from the start. The idea of putting anything on earth is, after all, an intending idea, isn't it? And so it's something that doesn't, theoretically doesn't fully work. But you will agree that, well, I don't know if you would agree, because Peter and I don't often agree on this particular thing. You would agree that the idea of fully doing something is not fully achieving something, does not really relate to the way in which my generation within the deconstructive establishment thought of any practice. It thought of practice as something that you undertake knowing that the intending subject is a limited position, let's say. The idea, and in fact, it's like Hegel's notion of needing, of the Vorstellung being not just a normative deviation for the subject. You have to have some kind of a concept-like thing in order to go toward the concept. And so the subject could only ever make these Vorstellungen. And Kant's notion that the Vorstellungen do not come out of Wille, but out of Willkür. That kind of position of non-decisiveness is the position out of which one throws away the idea of the double bind and chooses a single bind without which one cannot move into practice. But then one says also, and so in my own case, for a very, very long time, I have made a division between the subject and the agent. I should say here that when Judith Butler makes the division, her idea of subject is my idea of agent. So therefore, it's all right. It's just two different words. So it's the agent who's generally validated by an institution. It takes us back to the institution discussion, who actually has the intention of practicing. And remember, I mean, now I will just repeat some stuff from Derrida, which I find still useful, that it's actually, it takes the terms of its critique from what it critiques, because so that it is a kind of, and so therefore it is obliged to enter what it critiques extremely intimately. Akbar Abbas called this critical intimacy rather than critical distance. That is already compromised, isn't it? So then from within this compromised position, what it does is, again, repeating, and vulgarizing, because certainly I'm not I can't make all the moves. I'm not a philosopher. So I can't philosophize. But at any rate, so what it does is enter into this text to supplement it. In other words, suggests that the system is not total. It actually takes away totalities, this supplementing act. But what is it to supplement? It is to be in the shape of the whole that this total system actually has, which in the early Derrida is called a blanc textuel, a textual blank. In other words, exactly shaped by the part in the text which is open to the transaction of thinking. And so this is hard to understand, but not for you. So therefore, the idea of supplementation is to go into, to deny the totality of the system, and then go and know exactly what shaped whole it's filling. But then after that, it also introduces the incalculable, the contingent, which will make it transactional. It's dangerous, the supplement. And in my thinking, if you've read anything by me, you will know that this is what brings in gendering, because you can't really keep gendering, especially gendering which goes beyond heteronormativity. And this is old Spivak stuff. You can't really bring that in because, as a calculation, because violence can be desired, dot, dot, dot. So at any rate, and violence of a different sort. So at any rate, that particular way of practice beginning, later, much later in Derrida in the 80s, became something that I've called affirmative sabotage. And I was describing this, if you want a formula, the old reversal displacement formula became do not accuse, do not excuse, enter as if with something like love, locates the moment where the system betrays itself, inhabit it, and turn it around for use, affirmative sabotage. So to sabotage something, you really have to know very well. But simply to saboter means to destroy. We can't afford to do that because, after all, when colonialism began, then our ways of doing things were stopped, and they had all the leisure on our backs to develop these systems. So we should sabotage them rather than be totally impractical and go back in history and say we are decolonizing this nonsense. So therefore, and then the practice, this is Guillem's idea, not Derrida's or Foucault's, that it norms the theory. So the theory is actually theorizing, is made that way, like a halfway house. You don't apply it. It's breaking up the old theory-practice divide. And so the practice is also a kind of theorizing, if you like. I mean, I'm talking in a way that, again, needs explanation, but, I'm already giving a long answer since it was a philosophical answer. But so therefore, mettre en œuvre is a complicated task. That's why I think it's different from faire, because that kind of takes, I don't know what they're going to do because I'm going to hear some of them. But that's the difference that I was talking about. And that's the way in which I was talking about. And so, just to end with a very vulgar example, you see, when I teach in the, either with the adults or with the children, when I actually am teaching, it's like I've been thrown into water, sinking or swimming, okay? And then afterwards, when I start thinking of what happened, I begin to see how the actual experience of that teaching normed a certain kind of theoretical preparation that I had, and in fact shows up bits of the theory that can still be of use. So in both cases, in different ways. So to an extent, that's why I was saying that that you put a certain kind of theory you put it to work and to produce a certain practice of learning, which I call here freedom. Now, relationship between freedom and learning, I'm not going to talk about now, but this, to an extent, is that side of the literary humanities, which, unlike the knowledge-producing disciplines with truth claims, teaches the practice of learning. Does that make sense? I tried to do my best.
Thank you. So one last question, please. One last.
Where are you? Who are
you? We cannot see you.
At the end, my name is Mohammad Mahbubur Rahman. I'm from Bangladesh. I'd like to take the opportunity to ask you in Bangla, if you will.
Why? Nobody will understand. It's not polite. Ask in English.
Okay. I feel something ambiguous regarding freedom, learning, and madness. For example, recently I have completed my postdoc from Geneva Graduate Institute.
Just wait a second. Freedom, learning, and what?
Madness.
Madness.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
After completion of the postdoc, I think that I have learned nothing. I would like to go back and do another PhD. How do you evaluate this thinking? Is it a madness or learning, practicing? What is your opinion?
No, I don't think it's madness. I mean, you can say, you know, in a kind of colloquial way that is crazy, but on the other hand, many people take more than one PhD because they feel that the old one was useless. So no, I wouldn't say, it can even be quite a reasonable decision. You know, it depends. I mean, I would have to... I would have to, you know, really know much more about you. I would have to see whether you were serious or just kind of self-promoting in a certain way. You know, I wouldn't know. I mean, this is also like, you know, a kind of see how I am type thing. So, no, I wouldn't know. But by itself, I don't think it's madness. Madness is a more serious thing. But I would say that this bringing, see, I don't say that education does, I mean, my kind of humanities teaching does anything particularly. It develops a certain kind of ability to go outside of oneself and displace oneself into whatever it is studying, whether it's good or bad. And that practice, the reason why I use the word freedom, that not independence, freedom, that practice is something that may come in like muscle memory when you're an athlete. I mean, when you're playing and you're playing well, you're certainly not reminding yourself, hey, you know, you must follow through, etc. Then you're not an athlete. So to an extent, when you work hard at this kind of obsessive learning, then, in fact, it may kick in when the ethical, which I don't think is something that you choose, when it's in that situation, when the ethical confronts you, this reflex, which has been trained, may or may not kick in. So that, in fact, really has nothing to do with wanting to take another PhD. one does, in fact, regret. And I think it's a good idea, because you are young yet. You know, I hope, I mean, I've myself lived so long. You know, you can live to be 100. So if you're in your late 20s or early 30s or whatever, you can hope that you will have a long intellectual life. So another PhD, what, 6 years? It's not going to, it's going to make you happier. So, I mean, I don't know, it might. So therefore, you know, I mean, if we had the time and if we were not to bore a huge audience and we were sitting down together, I would even ask you, I mean, what was your old discipline, why you felt you learned nothing from your postdoc, what discipline were you wanting to go toward, but I don't think that conversation should take place now. But no, don't think it's madness. You want to do it, do it.
Thank you very much for your response. And thank you for everyone for coming tonight, and thank you, Gayatri, for...
You know, I can't hear what you're saying.
Thank you very much for coming tonight, and thank you, the audience, for being here, and have a good night. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, really.